Okay, so today we're doing October-November 2022 question paper 13. Two questions are not relevant, changes to the syllabus. Question 2 and question 30. However, we'll answer question 30 anyway, because I don't trust Cambridge on this particular topic. So, and it's very straightforward also. So, which government action will conflict with the named economic target? So, the action of smaller trade quotas would lead to reduced import levels. Lower indirect tax would lead to more equal incomes. Lower interest rates would lead to more consumer spending, but a lower exchange rate, a depreciation of the currency, would result in aggregate demand moving to the right, which is likely to increase inflation, not to lower inflation. So that would be A. Our country is currently experiencing deflation, has a large national debt that is greater than its annual real income. Which combination of policies is most likely to increase the general price level without adding to national debt? Okay, so first of all, without adding to national debt, we will have to decrease the budget deficit. Because anytime we increase the budget deficit, we add to the national debt. Because government spending, if we increase the budget deficit, government spending rises more than tax revenue will rise, which means that we will owe more to the national debt, maybe in terms of our public debt and both our external debt. So if we're trying to increase the general price level, what we're left with is choosing between decreasing money supply or increasing money supply. Increasing general price level, remember, we'd be looking for the expansionary policy. So that would be the expansionary monetary policy, which is to increase the money supply. AD would move right. If we decrease the money supply, that's a contractionary monetary policy. AD would move left. So B is the correct answer here. 28. What change in economic circumstances is most likely to lead to a reduction in the rate of domestic inflation? Okay, so again, what we're looking for is AD moving left. Depreciation of the currency, that would be AD right. So it would not reduce inflation, it would increase inflation. Reduction in productivity of labour, AS would move left. It would cause cost push inflation. Worldwide recession, yeah, AD would move left with a worldwide recession. Consumption across the world and how much is produced would drop. Unemployment would rise. So it would lead to a reduction in the rate of domestic inflation. And if we increase indirect taxes to finance increased welfare payments, increase in direct taxes would allow us to reduce the rate of inflation, but not if we're doing it to finance increased welfare payments. They would counteract each other. Finance welfare payments would form part of government spending, which would still be a component of AD that would increase. So the increase in government spending would be matched by the decrease in consumption and investment. And that would result in, if they were the exact amounts for the increase in direct taxes collected, equaling the increase in government spending, then AD would remain unchanged. And that would not help us to decrease our inflation rate. Question 27, there's a lot of inflation questions in this paper. What would be likely to decrease inflation? So again, what we're looking for is either AD left, or we're looking for AS right, which would give us more room to grow, and assuming AD stays at the same level, then it would reduce our general price level. So decreasing consumer saving would not have an effect. Again, consumer expenditure would have an effect, but the saving wouldn't. They decrease their saving. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to spend more. A decrease in unemployment, so no. That would mean that we're probably increasing real GDP, which is likely to increase inflation. Aggregate demand might move to the right. Increase in labour productivity, yes, that would result in aggregate supply shifting to the right, which would give us more productive capacity, and assuming AD remains unchanged, would result in the rate of inflation dropping. An increase in taxes on imports, that could, if those imports are raw materials that are needed, that could also cause cost push inflation by increasing our cost of production and by shifting our aggregate supply to the left. Okay, which statement about changing price levels is correct? Savers prefer index-linked savings when there's deflation rather than inflation. That's definitely incorrect. They prefer savings to be index-linked when there's inflation, because then the value of their savings will be rising, even though the real value will be staying the same. When there's deflation, the nominal value is decreasing because the price level is decreasing. Producers prefer deflation to inflation. Not true. They prefer inflation, because assuming they can keep wages at the same level, then they can pocket the increased profit from being able to sell products at a higher price. If they've got deflation and wages are staying the same, then their profit margins are actually decreasing. Government revenue from indirect taxes falls during inflation. Not necessarily true. So revenue might actually rise from indirect taxes during inflation, because aggregate demand and a shift in aggregate demand to the right might actually cause the inflation, which means that consumer expenditure consumption is actually increasing. People are spending more on goods and services, so the governments might actually collect more from the indirect taxes. Anyone on a fixed income has rising real income during deflation. That is true. Their real income, if it's fixed, will always rise during deflation because the value of money is falling. So the value of their fixed income is actually rising during that period. Okay, 25. Trade in services is a component of the current account and the balance of payments. What is an example of a trade in services? So remember, services are generally income from foreign tourists, right? That's a service that's provided. Income from overseas investments, export revenue from primary commodities, and development aid for foreign countries, they would all be components of either the balance of trade in goods, of the primary income, or of the secondary income, which are the 4 different components that make up the current account of the balance of payments. So the services is generally to do with tourism. The goods would be, for example, those commodities or goods that we sell, export abroad, which would bring in money, or we import goods from other countries, which would be money flowing out. Income from foreign tourists is a credit item. It's a plus or positive balance on our trade and services. The income that we give to foreign countries when we travel is money that is credited out of the trade and services balance. And then development aid for foreign countries would form part of the secondary income. Okay, what is a certain outcome on AD and AS of an increase in factor productivity? Similar to the previous questions, certain outcome of this is aggregate supply shifting to the right because our society or our economy becomes more productive. So that would be a downward shift of the AS curve in absolutely all circumstances. Terms of trade questions. So we said before, the key thing to take into account here, so what's the country's terms of trade index for year 2? Volume has nothing to do with it. It's very simply the index of export prices divided by the index of import prices. So 121, which is index of exports over index of imports, multiplied by 100, that should give us 110. Uh, 22. Government of a country changes from a balanced budget to a budget deficit. Okay, so AD will be moving to the right. From which point along their LRAS will the change cause the largest increase in employment without creating inflationary pressure? Okay, so at D here, if we have any change in AD, we know it's going to be moving to the right. That is going to cause inflationary pressure because we can see that the price level will rise. That will be the same for C. A change here would cause inflation. AD will move to the right. Therefore, the one that will cause the least inflation would be A, because we've still got room for AD to move to the right, for the price level to stay the same. For example, if AD shifts here, and then the increase in real output would signify to us that we're increasing employment. Okay, we've more room for growth in this case. So remember that the further to the left we are on the LRAS, the more spare capacity we have, which means the more we can increase employment and increase output without having to actually increase the general price level. An economy is in equilibrium. A combination of events will definitely cause an increase in general price level of the economy and decrease in its real output. Okay, so remember that real output will generally rise if our aggregate demand is increasing. Okay, the circumstances in which we will have general price level of an economy decrease in real output would be D, if our AD remains unchanged and if our AS moves to the left. Okay, it would cause cost push inflation, which is where real GDP will go down and where price level will rise. So if I just represent that quickly here on a diagram for you, AS will shift to the left, AD will remain unchanged, and what we can see here is price level will rise here to P1, real GDP will decrease to Y1, which would signify lower unemployment, lower living standards, lower national income, and we can see the fact that real GDP is decreased and the fact that price level has risen. Okay. Other circumstances here, if AD goes left and if SRAS stays the same, then the price level will drop, which is not what we're looking for. We're looking for increase in general price level. And if both decrease, then it depends on the rate that they're decreasing at. So a decrease in SRAS will result in price level going up. A decrease in AD will result in price level going down. So if AS would have to, in that case, decrease by more than the decrease in AD for the price level to rise, as well as for the real GDP to drop. But it will not definitely. The only one that is definitely is the one we have shown here, which is D. Okay, same diagram as before. Very simple to interpret this diagram. Really very easy. So government removes the tariff. Okay, so they remove the tariff. What will be the change in domestic production? You take the line where we have the world supply with tariff and then the world supply without tariff. Production, remember, is relating to domestic supply. So very simply, it would be a reduction in VW, right? WV, which is the change between the tariff lines along the domestic supply. Okay, so once we get rid of, essentially, how do you interpret this graph? Once we get rid of the tariff, the domestic supply will decrease because now it's easier to import goods. So the domestic supply is now less competitive in terms of their international competitors, which means that they're going to sell less and they're going to supply less because of that. Okay, so very simple A. Okay, government wishes to influence the price of a good, introduces maximum price Pmax and minimum price Pmin. What can be concluded? So first thing, here's equilibrium at P. We can see maximum price is correct, which is placed below the equilibrium. But the minimum price, remember, has to be placed above the equilibrium for it to be effective. So both will be effective as wrong. Minimum price will be effective as wrong. Market price will continue to operate is wrong, because we've imposed the minimum and maximum. The maximum price, however, is the only one that will be effective because it's correctly placed below the equilibrium. Remember, the maximum price is associated with creating the shortage, and in order to create a shortage, which is an extension in demand and a contraction in supply, it has to be placed below equilibrium. The minimum price is associated with creating a surplus, and in order to create a surplus, there has to be an extension in supply and a contraction in demand, so it has to be placed above the equilibrium. Question 18. Good question, this one, because students don't often understand when we talk about the incidence of an indirect tax, what does it refer to? So it refers to the proportion of the tax paid by the consumer relative to the producer. Okay? It does not refer to any of these like the revenue they generate, the hidden economy, etc. None of those are relevant. Remember that when we draw, let's say for example, if I draw it quite quickly, the indirect tax, okay? So here would be price before, the incidence of the tax here. Oh, sorry. It's very hard to draw on this laptop. Well, incidence of tax, we take price down until where it hits the original supply. And then that's the full incidence of the tax here. I'll just put that in a different color. I'll put it in a black color. So remember that the incidence of the tax that the consumer pays would be this area in here in black, because they pay the difference in the price. And then the incidence of the tax that falls on the producer would be this area in orange that's left over from the full. That's why it's the proportion of tax paid by the consumer relative to the producer that's called the incidence, or sometimes we refer to it as the burden. Okay, the diagram that was that's clearer to be shown on this particular question is in question paper 12 or 11 for October-November 2022. Can't remember which paper, but it's one of those two. Okay, if an industry is currently state-owned and state-run, what does not represent a reason for it being privatized? Decisions will no longer be taken with political considerations in mind. That is true. That is a reason for privatizing it. Benefits of merit goods will be taken into account in decision making. That is not true. So that will be the case when the government is controlling it, but when we privatize it, the external benefits that those merit goods generate will not be taken into account by the private firm. They will only take into account the private benefits and the private costs, not the external benefits and external costs associated with producing goods. Owners would have more incentive to make it operate profitably. That is true for the private sector, and D is also true for the private sector. They'd have greater benefits or greater incentives to generate new technology, lower their cost of production, and increase their profits. Okay, question 16. Market for goods Z is in equilibrium, 1,000 units sold at a price of $10. Government is paying a subsidy of $2 per unit. Which conditions will total spending? Okay, this is an unusual style of question. Total spending by the government on the subsidy be the smallest. Okay, so remember what we're looking for here is we're going to be looking for the ones that are inelastic. Okay, now why is that? That is because the spending by the government is per unit, right? So the greater the change in the quantity that is traded, then the greater the size of the subsidy, or the greater the amount that the government has to spend on the subsidy. because as the quantity increases, they're paying a subsidy of $2 per unit every time. So the higher the quantity traded will change, then the more units the government has to provide a subsidy for. So the ones that are inelastic, if PED is inelastic and PES is inelastic as well, then in that case what's going to happen is the quantity traded is not going to change by a lot, so the subsidy will be much less than if one of them was elastic or if they were both elastic. Okay, question 15, another good question. 2009, the Australian government made a payment of $900 to those who earned less than $100,000 per year. How would this payment be described? Okay, that would be a progressive payment, because if you think about it, they're providing $900. Now, the $900 to somebody who's earning $10,000 a year represents a much higher payment as a percentage than a payment of $900 to somebody who's earning $90,000 a year. So therefore the low income earners are the ones who are benefiting, and the high income earners are the ones who are still benefiting, but benefiting less in terms of a percentage of their income. And that is what will make it a progressive payment. Low income earners are the ones who benefit, high income earners will benefit less. Okay, it's kind of like a contradiction of how the progressive taxation system works, where low-income earners will pay a smaller percentage of their income in tax, high-income earners will pay a higher percentage in tax. Okay, but the same theory applies. Low-income earners benefit, high-income earners don't benefit as much. 14. Diagram shows two demand and two supply curves. Initial equilibrium is at H. What combination of shifts in the demand and supply curves would result in a change? Okay, first of all, we can see here that this is demand, right? So let's label it. This is D. This is D1. This is S, and this is S1. So we can see that we have to have a shift to the right in demand and a shift to the right in supply. So increase in demand and increase in supply would be the correct answer there. Very straightforward. Market for a product is initially in equilibrium. What combination of changes will cause the price of the product to rise and the quantity sold to fall? Okay, so this is one where you just need to draw the diagrams for each if you're unsure, right? Now, I'll just show you the correct answer diagram, and that would be B. As you do more of these, you'll eventually just be able to do them in your head. However, if you draw a diagram for each of them, you'll be able to get the correct answer anyway, or at least you definitely should. So here, for example, here's our initial price. Here is our initial quantity. And if we have decrease in demand that is smaller than a decrease in supply, so we'll have a small shift in the demand curve to the left, and we will have a large shift in the supply curve to the left. And what we can see here is price of the product will rise, but the quantity that is traded of the product will reduce, which matches up to what we're looking for this question. Question 12. Which product has the lowest PED? So again, very straightforward. You just need to be able to calculate it. Remember that in this case, you need to know your formulas first. So it's the percentage change in QD divided by the percentage change in price, which is what gives us the PED. If the quantity demanded changes, but the price does not change, that tells us that it is perfectly elastic, right? And what we should know, which they're labeled in the slides in your OneDrive there, perfectly elastic, it has a PED of infinity, because we can't divide something that's changing into zero, right? Second one, PED will be 1.0, which means that it's going to be unitary. 5 over 10 will give us 0.5. And then last one, if quantity demanded doesn't change, price does, then our PED is going to look something like this, and that means it's going to be perfectly inelastic. Okay, and we know that perfectly inelastic will have a PED of 0.00, which means it will have the lowest PED value. Okay, perfectly elastic, if you're unsure, for A, looks something like this, right? Okay, final of a major sports event is held at a stadium that has a fixed capacity of 40,000 people. So straight away, we can see that C and D are wrong. Fixed capacity, supply will be perfectly inelastic, just like B and like A. Price for the seat is set at PF, but when the tickets go on sale, all tickets are sold very quickly and many disappointed people are unable to buy a ticket. Okay, what does that show? That shows excess demand, or it shows a shortage, right? So which diagram best represents that? Okay, so we can see here in A, we would actually have less people demanding the tickets than the 40,000. So that would actually result in, let's say for example, 35,000 tickets being sold, but we know that's not true. So A therefore cannot be correct. The tickets that go on sale are all sold very quickly. So here we can see this would be the equilibrium price, but they charged a lower price, which resulted in, let's say for example here, 55,000 tickets were being demanded. All tickets therefore would have been sold very quickly at this price of PF, and there would be left this gap, which is the shortage or the excess demand that we're looking for. Okay, therefore B would have to be correct answer here. Okay, question 10. So, very simple. Diagram shows the effect of a change in the market for good X on the market for good Y. So, what's concluded? Now, forget even looking at A, B, C, and D, and just look here at what happens. The demand shifts to the right, which results in an extension in supply. Okay, so once we have that extension in supply, we can tell straight away here that because good Y has had a shift in supply, that it has to be jointly supplied with good X. Okay, and that will be B. And that's because the extension in good X results in us being able to increase our supply of good Y. What causes an inelastic market supply curve for an agricultural crop such as wheat? Okay, it's to do with our PES here, right? So again, we're looking for the determinants of PES essentially. So, storage of excess production for future sale, that would result in it being elastic because it would allow us to respond quickly to the market. Efficient use of fertilizers, again, that would make us elastic. Determinants of PES. Government decision to import crops at a time of shortage wouldn't have an effect on making it inelastic at all. It's a secondary, or it's an external decision that is made essentially. Whereas very long time required to produce additional output would make it inelastic. The time taken to produce a product is a determinant of PES. The longer it takes, the more inelastic it is. The shorter the time it takes, the more elastic it is. Also, if you just think about A as well, if they decide to import crops at a time of shortage, that would make the market supply curve relatively elastic as well, because they'd be importing it to be able to sell on the market for this country. So even during a shortage where our farmers cannot produce wheat, we'd still be able to import the wheat to be sold to the market. That would also be elastic. Okay, we've seen this question before. It came up on our midterm, I think it was. A lot of students got it wrong. Read it very carefully. Total expenditure is represented here on the horizontal axis. So, which curve represents the products of price elastic and unitary price elastic? So first of all, unitary we can see here would be 1, and that's because if we just quickly reference this, price up, let's call it total expenditure, or total revenue is the same thing, right? Total revenue is the same, doesn't change. Price goes down, total expenditure or total revenue is the exact same. If it is elastic, price goes up, total expenditure goes down, price goes down, total expenditure goes up. If it is inelastic, then price goes up, total expenditure goes up, price goes down, total expenditure goes down. Okay, now once we know that basic information, which we have to be able to answer the question, and we take a look at the graphs. Now we can see here straight away, we can see our answer is going to be C, because we've identified unitary as 1. Total expenditure is not going to change as the price rises along the vertical here, or as the price drops along the vertical axis as well. Elastic is 3, and that's because as the price goes down here, we can see that the total expenditure will rise, right? And that matches up with what our theory tells us. Price goes down, total expenditure rises. Okay, diagram shows the demand curve and supply curve for a product. Which area represents producer surplus? So remember, producer surplus is the area below the equilibrium price, which is W, to the bottom of the supply curve. So our producer surplus here is WYO. Okay? Consumer surplus would be WXY, the area above the equilibrium price to the top of the demand curve. So therefore we can see OWYZ minus OYZ would leave us with OWY, which would be our producer surplus. Okay, consumer surplus, we've just explained what it is. Just look back at the previous question. Area above the equilibrium price to the top of the demand curve. Therefore it means that some consumers are willing to pay more than the market price for rice, and the consumers who are paying the market price are receiving the consumer surplus for doing so. Okay, 5 is a difficult question. Government wishes to ensure adequate flood defences, which we know are a public good, provided in coastal areas. Which action is most likely only to be undertaken by the government? Now remember, the other actions can be undertaken by the government, but which one is most likely only to be undertaken would be the financing. And that is because once we know it's a public good, we know that it is non-excludable and non-rivalrous, and that the private sector will not provide it because they cannot make a profit. Therefore, in order to actually have the good in the first place and to have the need to either maintain it or to build it or design it or whatever it is, we need to finance it, right? We need to get the funding to do it. And that funding will only be provided by the government. The government may build it and they may maintain it too, but the action they're most likely to undertake would definitely be financing it, because private sector would never finance it. We could actually pay the private sector from government funds to maintain it, for example. We could pay the private sector to build it, and they would do so because they'd be obtaining a profit. But to finance the project for a public good would only be done by a government, because of the lack of a profit incentive for the private sector. Okay, question 4, very simple. What do we see? We see a curved PPC. Once we see a curved PPC, we know straight away that it has an increasing opportunity cost, irrespective of whether it is good Y or good X. Okay, as we move along the curve in this direction or in the opposite direction, the opportunity cost of producing each good will increase. Okay, so that is simply D. Remember, there's only one other type of PPC we can get, and that is a straight line PPC, which shows a constant opportunity cost. Okay, which does not increase as we move further along in our production of one good or the other. Question 3. What will usually result if production is divided into separate processes? So we're talking about the division of labour here that are assigned to different people. So what happens with the division of labour? Does it result in lower output? No, it doesn't. It results in higher output. Does it result in more boredom? Absolutely, because people are stuck doing the same tasks day after day. And does it result in lower costs? Yes. The reason we do it into separate processes, even though they may get more bored, they may become better at doing that particular task over time, and that may help us to generate economies of scale, which will lower our average costs. Finally, which action would not raise the quality of the particular factor of production? Labour, making apprentices and training compulsory, that definitely would raise the quality of labour. If we use fertilisers on land, that also would raise the quality of land. And if we use risk management advice for enterprise, that would definitely raise the quality of enterprise. So that only leaves us with A. If we operate a machine continuously at full capacity, that is definitely not going to raise the quality of capital. That is going to wear out the capital. Okay, what we want is to improve the quality of that machine through either technological advances or something, but just simply having a machine running at full capacity all the time does not make it better. It will just result in more wear and tear, which may actually reduce the quality of that capital. And that is that for this paper as well.